The morning sun on 442B cast strange colors through the crystal forest. Dr. Sarah walked carefully between the tall glass-like trees. Her boots made soft sounds on the ground covered with broken crystal pieces. She had been on this planet for 6 months now, but the beauty still amazed her. Sarah worked at the research station. Her job was to study the plants and animals on this distant world. Today, she was doing her weekly patrol to check the thermal vents in the southern forest. These hot spots in the ground gave energy to many strange life forms. She carried a heavy pack full of testing equipment. Her environmental suit kept her safe from the planet's atmosphere. The suit was thick and made walking harder, but it was necessary. The air here would kill a human in minutes. The crystal trees around her were taller than Earth's redwoods. They grew from the ground like massive glass towers. When the sun hit them, they split the light into rainbow patterns. The effect was beautiful but also dangerous. The light reflections could confuse travelers and make them lose their way. Sarah checked her scanner. The device beeped quietly as it measured radiation levels and air quality. Everything looked normal. She had walked this path many times before. The route was safe and well marked. As she moved deeper into the forest, Sarah thought about the reports she had read. This planet was home to creatures called. They were large predators that looked like giant cats with 6 legs. They had metal-colored fur and could speak with their minds. No human had ever seen one and lived to tell about it. The research team knew they existed because of tracks and signs they left behind. Sometimes the sensors picked up large heat signatures moving through the forest, but the creatures were smart and stayed hidden from humans. Sarah reached the first thermal vent. Steam rose from a crack in the crystal ground. She knelt down and took out her equipment. The scanner showed high mineral content in the steam. She took samples of the water and gas coming from the vent. While she worked, Sarah heard something strange. It was a high sound like crying or whimpering. She stopped what she was doing and listened carefully. The sound came again, faint but clear. It sounded like an animal in trouble. Sarah knew she should ignore it. The safety rules were clear. Never investigate unknown sounds. Never leave the marked path. Always return to base if anything unusual happened. But the sounds continued, and they sounded like Bobby's calling for help. She packed her equipment quickly and followed the sounds. They led her away from the thermal vent toward a thick group of crystal formations. The sounds got louder as she got closer. Sarah pushed through the crystal branches and found herself in a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a pile of broken crystal rocks. The crying sounds came from underneath the rocks. Sarah moved closer and saw movement in the shadows. 3 small shapes were trapped under the heavy crystal pieces. As her eyes got used to the dim light, Sarah gasped. The trapped animals were cubs. They were no bigger than house cats, but she could see the 6 small legs and the shiny fur that marked them as members of the deadly species. The cubs looked at her with large, frightened eyes. Their fur was a dull silver color instead of the bright metal shine that adult had. 2 of the cubs were moving around, trying to get free. The third one lay very still. It looked hurt. Sarah's heart raced. These were the bobbies of the most dangerous predators on the planet. Adult killed anything that came near their young, but these cubs were clearly in trouble. They were trapped and scared. The hurt one might be dying. She checked her scanner. The cubs' body heat was getting lower. The cold crystal cave was making them sick. If she left them here, they would probably die before their parents found them. Sarah knew what the rule book said. Call for help and leave immediately. Let the experts handle it. Do not approach unknown alien life forms. The base commander would order her to retreat right away. But looking at the small, frightened faces of the cubs, Sarah could not just walk away. She had always loved animals. Even as a child, she had rescued hurt birds and stray cats. She became a because she wanted to help and understand alien creatures. The injured cub made a weak sound. Its breathing was shallow and quick. Sarah could see that one of its legs was bent at a wrong angle. The poor thing was in pain. She looked at her equipment pack. She had emergency medical supplies and tools that might help move the rocks. Her suit had strong mechanical arms that could lift heavy objects. Maybe she could free the cubs without getting hurt. But Sarah also knew the dangers. If adults found her here with their bobbies, they would kill her without question. The creatures were fiercely protective of their young. They could move faster than her suit, and their claws could cut through metal. The cubs cried again. The sound was getting weaker. They were running out of time. Sarah made her choice. She could not leave helpless bobbies to die, even if they belonged to dangerous predators. She moved toward the pile of rocks and began to study how to free the trapped cubs safely. Her radio crackled with a message from base. "Doctor, please report your status. You are behind schedule for check-in." Sarah turned off her radio. She would deal with the consequences later. Right now, 3 small lives depended on her help. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Sarah looked at the pile of broken crystal rocks that trapped the 3 cubs. The pieces were sharp and heavy. One wrong move could hurt the bobbies or cause more rocks to fall. She needed to be very careful. She knelt down near the cubs. They hissed at her and tried to scratch with their tiny claws. The claws made small scratches on her suit but could not cut through the tough material. The cubs were scared and did not understand that she wanted to help. "It's okay, little ones," Sarah said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." She knew the cubs could not understand her words, but maybe her calm voice would help them feel less afraid. She had read that many animals could sense emotions in voice tones. Sarah studied the rock pile carefully. The largest crystal piece was holding up the others. If she could move that one, the rest might shift and give the cubs room to escape. But the big crystal was very heavy. Her suit's mechanical arms were strong, but not strong enough to lift something that big. She tried a different approach. Sarah used her suit's tools to chip away at the smaller rocks first. Each piece she removed gave the cubs a little more space. The work was slow and difficult. The crystal was harder than normal rock and her tools got hot from the friction. As she worked, Sarah talked to the cubs in a gentle voice. She tried to copy some of the sounds they made. Her language database had a few words that researchers had figured out. She said the word that meant safe and help over and over. Slowly, the cubs began to calm down. They stopped hissing and watched her work. The injured cub was very weak. Its breathing came in short, quick gasps. Sarah could see that its fur was losing the metallic shine that Healthy had. After an hour of careful work, Sarah had cleared enough space to reach the injured cub. She took out her medical kit and prepared a small dose of pain medicine. The cub was too weak to fight her when she gave it the injection. The medicine helped right away. The cub's breathing became easier, and it looked at Sarah with large, grateful eyes. She carefully checked its injured leg. The bone was broken, but not too badly. She wrapped the leg in a soft bandage that would help it heal. The other 2 cubs watched everything Sarah did. They seemed to understand that she was helping their brother. One of them made a soft purring sound that reminded Sarah of a cat. Sarah continued removing rocks. Her suit's power was getting lower from all the heavy work. She needed to hurry, but she also had to be careful not to cause a cave-in that would hurt the cubs. The radio in her suit started making noise again. "Doctor, respond immediately. Sensors show large heat signatures moving in your area. Return to base now." Sarah felt cold fear in her stomach. Large heat signatures meant adults were nearby. They had probably heard their bobbies crying and were coming to find them. But she could not abandon the cubs now when she was so close to freeing them. She turned off the radio again and worked faster. The biggest crystal piece was loose now, but still too heavy to move by hand. Sarah looked at her equipment and had an idea. She took out her plasma cutter. This tool was meant for cutting rock samples, but it might work on crystal too. The cutter used very hot energy beams to slice through hard materials. It was dangerous to use in a small space, but she was running out of options. Sarah positioned the cutter carefully and began to cut the big crystal. The tool made bright sparks and filled the air with crystal dust. The cubs huddled together and watched with wide eyes. The cutting was working, but slowly. The crystal was tougher than regular rock. Sarah's hands were getting tired from holding the heavy cutter steady. Sweat ran down her face inside her helmet. As she worked, Sarah heard new sounds from the forest around them. Heavy footsteps, branches breaking. Something large was moving through the crystal trees. The sounds were getting closer. "Come on," Sarah whispered to herself. "Just a little more." The plasma cutter finally broke through the big crystal. The piece split in half with a loud crack. The other rocks shifted and rolled away, opening up a clear path for the cubs to escape. But as the rocks moved, they made a lot of noise. The sound echoed through the crystal forest like thunder. Sarah knew that every for miles around had heard it. The two healthy cubs scrambled out of the rock pile right away. They ran to their injured brother and nuzzled him with their heads. The hurt cub tried to stand up but could not put weight on his broken leg. Sarah gently picked up the injured cub. It was heavier than she expected, and its fur felt strange, like metal wire that had been made soft. The cub did not fight her. It seemed to trust her now. The other two cubs stayed close to Sarah. They made soft chittering sounds that might have been thanks or might have been calls to their parents. Sarah hoped it was thanks. She gathered her equipment quickly and looked around for the best way to leave. The sounds from the forest were much closer now. Heavy breathing. The soft pad of huge feet on crystal ground. Whatever was coming was very big and moving fast. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized the truth. She had saved the cubs, but now she was trapped with them. An adult was almost here, and she had nowhere to run. Sarah held the injured cub close to her chest, while the other two stayed near her feet. The sounds from the forest were getting louder and closer. Heavy breathing echoed between the crystal trees. Something very large was hunting for the source of the noise. She looked around the small clearing, trying to find an escape route. The crystal formations made a maze of passages, but most were too narrow for her bulky environmental suit. The path she had used to get here would take her right toward whatever was coming. The injured cub in her arms made a soft sound. Its body temperature was still too low, and the broken leg needed proper medical care soon. The other cubs looked tired and scared. They had been trapped for hours and were weak from hunger and cold. Sarah checked her suit's power levels. The heavy work of moving rocks had drained the batteries faster than expected. She had enough power for maybe 2 more hours. After that, her life support would fail and she would die in the planet's poisonous atmosphere. She made a difficult choice. Instead of trying to run, Sarah would use her remaining tools to make sure all 3 cubs could escape safely, even if it meant she could not get away herself. Sarah set the injured cub down gently and took out her thermal charges. These small explosives were meant for breaking apart rock samples, but they might work to clear a better escape route for the cubs. The passages around the clearing were blocked by fallen crystal pieces from old cave-ins. She placed the charges carefully at weak points in the crystal walls. If she could blast open a new tunnel, the cubs could reach safety even if their parents arrived before she finished. The 2 healthy cubs watched her work with intelligent eyes. They seemed to understand that she was still trying to help them. One of them brought her a piece of crystal that had a sharp edge. The cub dropped it near her tools, as if offering to help. Sarah smiled inside her helmet. "Thank you, little one. You're very smart." The sounds from the forest stopped suddenly. The silence was more frightening than the noise had been. Sarah knew that predators often went quiet just before they attacked. Whatever was hunting them was very close now. She finished setting the thermal charges and moved the cubs to a safe distance. The injured cub could not move on its own, so Sarah carried it behind a large crystal formation that would protect them from the blast. "Cover your eyes," she told the cubs. even though they could not understand her words. She made gestures to show them what she meant. Sarah activated the charges. The explosion was much louder than she expected. The blast echoed through the crystal forest like thunder. Bright light flashed, and pieces of crystal flew through the air. When the smoke cleared, Sarah saw that her plan had worked. The explosion had opened a new tunnel through the crystal wall. The passage was wide enough for the cubs to escape and led toward the thermal vents where Sarah knew there were safe hiding places. But the explosion had also done something else. It had brought down part of the cave ceiling above them. New rocks blocked the path Sarah had used to enter the clearing. She was trapped with the cubs. Worse, the loud noise had definitely told everyone in the area exactly where they were. Sarah heard new sounds from multiple directions. Heavy footsteps, deep breathing. At least 2, maybe 3 large creatures were approaching the clearing. Sarah picked up the injured cub again and moved toward the escape tunnel she had created. The 2 healthy cubs followed her. At the tunnel entrance, she set down their injured brother and pointed down the passage. "Go," she said firmly. "Run to safety, find your family." The cubs looked at her with confused expressions. They chittered softly to each other in their own language. Sarah could not understand the words, but their meaning was clear. They did not want to leave her behind. "You have to go now," Sarah insisted. She gently pushed the healthy cubs toward the tunnel. "I'll be okay." But the cubs would not leave. They sat down next to their injured brother and looked at Sarah with determined faces. It seemed they had decided that if she would not come with them, they would stay with her. Sarah felt her heart break a little. These small creatures barely knew her, but they were showing loyalty and courage that amazed her. Even in the face of danger, they would not abandon someone who had helped them. The footsteps outside the clearing were very close now. Sarah could hear different breathing patterns that meant multiple large animals. The adult had found them. She took out her mining laser, the only weapon she had. The tool was meant for cutting rocks, not fighting, but it was better than nothing. The laser would probably not hurt an adult much, but she would try to protect the cubs as long as possible. Sarah positioned herself between the cubs and the clearing entrance. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it inside her helmet. Her hands shook as she held the laser ready. "Stay behind me," she whispered to the cubs. The crystal trees around the clearing began to move. Something huge was pushing through the forest, breaking branches and crushing smaller plants. The sound was like a landslide of metal and glass. Sarah saw a shadow moving beyond the crystal formations, then another shadow from a different direction. The adult had surrounded the clearing. There was no escape now. The injured cub made a weak calling sound. It was probably trying to let its parents know where it was. The other cubs joined in, their voices stronger but still clearly those of Bobby's. In response, Sarah heard something that made her blood freeze. A deep, rumbling call that seemed to come from the earth itself. The sound was so low and powerful that she felt it in her bones. It was answered by similar calls from the other directions. The adult were talking to each other, and they were talking about her. The forest became completely silent. Even the sound of Sarah's own breathing seemed too loud inside her helmet. The cubs huddled together behind her, making soft, worried noises. She kept her mining laser pointed toward the entrance to the clearing, though her hands were shaking. Then the crystal trees began to part like curtains. Something massive moved between them with impossible grace for its size. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she saw her first adult. The creature was enormous. It stood 3 meters tall at its shoulder and was twice as long as an earth elephant. Its 6 powerful legs ended in claws that looked like curved metal swords, but it was the fur that made Sarah gasp in amazement. The coat shifted colors like liquid metal. Silver flowed into deep blue, then changed to purple and back to silver again. The fur seemed to have its own light that made the creature glow softly in the dim crystal forest. This was clearly not just any adult. This was something special. The creature had 6 eyes arranged in pairs along its massive head. Each eye was larger than Sarah's fist and glowed with blue-white light. When those eyes focused on her, Sarah felt something touch her mind. It was not painful, but it was completely alien. Thoughts that were not her own brushed against her consciousness. Images flashed through her head, the crystal forest from high above, the cubs playing near the thermal vents, the moment they had become trapped under the rocks. Sarah realized with shock that the creature was reading her memories. It was seeing everything that had happened from her point of view. The decision to help the cubs, the careful work to free them, the choice to stay and protect them even when escape was impossible. The Alpha, for that was clearly what this magnificent creature was, stepped fully into the clearing. Its huge form moved with fluid grace that seemed to defy gravity. Behind it, Sarah caught glimpses of 2 other adults watching from the shadows between the trees. The cubs saw their parent and made excited chirping sounds. The 2 healthy ones ran toward the Alpha on unsteady legs, but instead of immediately gathering them up, the great creature continued to stare at Sarah. The mental touch grew stronger. Sarah felt alien emotions flowing through the connection, confusion, curiosity, and something that might have been respect. The Alpha was trying to understand why a strange creature would risk its life for cubs that were not its own. Through the telepathic link, Sarah sensed the Alpha's thoughts. It had lived for many centuries and had seen countless different species across the galaxy. Most creatures followed simple rules: protect your own kind, avoid danger, take what you need to survive. But this small human had broken all those rules. She had helped bobbies that belonged to one of the galaxy's most dangerous predator species. She had stayed to protect them even when she could have escaped. The Alpha had never encountered behavior like this before. Sarah felt the weight of the creature's ancient intelligence studying her. Images flowed through the mental connection, memories of other species the Alpha had encountered. Cold, logical beings who calculated every action. Aggressive races that saw other creatures as threats or food. Even peaceful species that avoided conflict by running away from danger. None of them would have done what Sarah did. The Alpha took another step closer. Sarah was close enough now to see her own reflection in its glowing eyes. She expected to feel fear, but instead she sensed something like wonder from the great creature. Through the telepathic connection, the Alpha shared more of its memories. Sarah saw flashes of other worlds, other civilizations, other first contacts between species. In every case, the meetings had been based on fear, greed, or the need for resources. But Sarah had not come to the cubs seeking anything for herself. She had helped them simply because they needed help. The concept was so alien to the Alpha's experience that it had difficulty understanding it. The injured cub made a weak sound from where it lay near the tunnel entrance. The Alpha's attention shifted to its hurt child. Sarah saw love and concern flow through the telepathic connection, emotions that were surprisingly similar to what a human parent might feel. The Alpha moved toward the injured cub, and Sarah stepped aside to give it room. The great creature examined its child with gentle care, using the tip of one claw to check the bandage Sarah had applied to the broken leg. Through their mental link, Sarah felt the Alpha's surprise at the quality of her medical work. The bandage was properly applied, and the cub's pain had been reduced by the medicine she had given it. A predator that had intended to eat the cubs would not have bothered with medical care. The Alpha looked at Sarah again. This time the mental touch was different, warmer, less invasive. It was not reading her memories by force now. Instead, it was asking permission to understand more about her species and her motivations. Sarah lowered her mining laser and tried to project thoughts of peace and friendship. She was not sure if the Alpha could read specific thoughts, but she hoped her emotions would come through clearly. What the Alpha found in her mind seemed to amaze it even more. Sarah's memories were full of caring for other creatures, pets she had rescued as a child, injured animals she had helped as a scientist. her deep love for all forms of life. The great creature stepped back and did something that no had ever recorded in the files about behavior. It lowered its massive head until its forehead almost touched the ground. The gesture was clearly one of respect and gratitude. Sarah felt tears in her eyes as she understood what was happening. This ancient, powerful being was thanking her for saving its children. More than that, it was acknowledging something about her species that it had never encountered before. The Alpha raised its head and looked directly into Sarah's eyes. Through their mental connection, she felt a decision being made. This meeting would change everything. The Alpha stood motionless for long moments, its glowing eyes fixed on Sarah. Through their telepathic connection, she could feel the creature's mind working through concepts that challenged everything it knew about the universe. In its 3 centuries of life, the Alpha had traveled among the stars and observed dozens of different species. Each race followed predictable patterns of behavior. They made careful calculations about risk and benefit before taking any action. If saving the cubs had only a 10% chance of success, they would have left them to die rather than waste resources on a failed attempt. The territorial hegemony races would have seen the cubs as future threats to be eliminated. The peaceful would have retreated to avoid any possibility of conflict with adult. Even species that claimed to value life would have chosen their own safety over helping alien children. But this human had acted according to a completely different set of rules. Through the mental link, Sarah felt the Alpha sharing memories of its home world. She saw images of society, a culture based on strength, family bonds, and territorial control. Cubs were protected fiercely by their blood relatives, but outsiders who approached young were always killed without question. The idea that a stranger would risk her life to save cubs that were not related to her was beyond the Alpha's understanding. Yet the evidence was clear in Sarah's memories and actions. The Alpha gathered its 3 cubs with gentle movements of its massive paws. The injured one was carefully lifted and cradled against the Alpha's warm fur. The little creature purred softly, safe in its parents' protection. But instead of simply leaving with its children, the Alpha made a choice that would echo across the galaxy. It sent out a powerful telepathic call that reached far beyond the crystal forest. Sarah felt the mental signal pass through her consciousness like a wave of pure thought. The message was complex, carrying layers of meaning that human minds could barely comprehend. Within minutes, Sarah's suit radio crackled to life with frantic voices from the research station. Doctor, respond immediately. We're receiving some kind of alien transmission directly into our computers. The message it's in perfect English. It's asking for you specifically. Sarah looked at the Alpha in amazement. Through their mental connection, she understood what had happened. The creature had reached into her mind, learned human language and communication protocols, and was now speaking directly to her people. The Alpha's telepathic abilities were far more advanced than anyone had imagined. It could not only read thoughts but also interface with electronic systems and translate complex ideas across species barriers. The radio continued. The message says we're invited to formal diplomatic contact. Doctor, what's your status? Are you safe? Sarah activated her radio with shaking hands. Base, this is Doctor. I'm safe and in direct contact with what appears to be an Alpha. The cubs are secure and unharmed. The silence from the radio lasted several seconds. Then, Doctor, did you say you're in direct contact with an adult, and you're alive? Affirmative. More than that, I think we're looking at a complete change in first contact protocols. Through the telepathic link, the Alpha shared its decision with Sarah. They had a concept called guardians, beings who protected life that was not their own. It was a theoretical idea that existed in their oldest legends, but had never been encountered in reality. Until now, the Alpha had decided that humans qualified as guardians. This gave Sarah's species a unique status in culture, protectors who could be trusted with their most precious possessions, their young. Over the following hours, as Sarah's suit power finally failed, and she was forced to trust the Alpha's protection, more incredible revelations emerged. They were not just intelligent predators living on one world. They were an ancient spacefaring civilization with colonies across multiple star systems. The Alpha began sharing star maps through their mental connection. Sarah saw routes through space that would cut travel time between Earth and the frontier colonies by months, locations of rare mineral deposits that could fuel humanity's expansion to the stars. Most importantly, safe passage agreements through space for all human vessels. But the Alpha wanted something in return. Not resources or territory, those could be taken by force if needed. What they wanted was knowledge of human compassion. They wanted to understand how a species could survive and thrive while caring for others outside their own kind. The Alpha proposed that humans serve as advisors in dealings with other alien species. Human empathy and understanding of different viewpoints could help to build better relationships across the galaxy. Sarah awakened 3 days later in the medical bay of the research station. Her first sight was of 3 small cubs playing in a specially designed habitat near her bed. The injured cub's leg was healing well, and all 3 seemed to have adopted her as part of their pack. The station commander, a usually serious woman named Dr. Martinez, sat beside Sarah's bed with an expression of wonder on her face. "The entire diplomatic landscape has changed," Dr. Martinez explained. "They have been watching human expansion for years. They could have stopped us or destroyed our colonies at any time. Instead, they waited to see what kind of species we really were." Sarah learned that her simple act of compassion had passed a test she never knew she was taking. The Alpha had deliberately allowed its cubs to wander near human territory. If the first human to find them had acted with typical galactic logic, the cubs would have been abandoned or worse. But Sarah had chosen differently, and that choice had opened doors between species that might have remained closed forever. 6 months later, Sarah held the title of Human Cultural Exchange Officer. She split her time between the research station and a new settlement where she learned their language and customs while teaching them about human culture. The 3 cubs she had rescued, now much larger and stronger, served as her constant companions and translators. They had grown to trust humans completely and were teaching other young that not all alien species were threats. The Alpha had become Earth's most powerful ally in the galaxy, providing protection and resources that accelerated human expansion by decades. Trade routes that would have taken years to establish were opened overnight. Dangerous regions of space became safe under protection. All because one human could not walk past cubs in danger. As Sarah watched her 3 friends playing in the station's garden, she reflected on how simple choices could change the course of history. She had never intended to become a diplomat or change relations. She had just seen bobbies who needed help and acted on her instincts. Sometimes, she realized, the most important moments in life came not from grand plans or careful strategies, but from simply choosing to care when caring seemed impossible.